Okay, I'm going to do my best to talk out loud my process for using this worksheet to redesign my English 202 course as an online class. I haven't taught English 202 online before. I've taught it remotely this semester. So I'm thinking about and sort of really starting with the big picture, starting with major assignments, skills, etc. And then I'm also planning out kind of the minutia of the course. And I've gotten myself up to week 2. um, and then so what I'm really finding myself leaning heavily on to do this is first of all the kind of curriculum for the course, the schedule of assignments, um, and in particular, not just sort of like the titles of things, but I find myself going back to the actual, what am I asking in the homework that's really preparing them for the class meeting for a given day? And then I'm looking at my lesson plans for, okay, well, what is it that I'm doing specifically in the classroom that gets them to those skills or to those outcomes for that particular day? So I'm doing a lot of that, and it's taking me some time. But what I'm also doing, especially for the big picture stuff, is I'm constantly going back to my syllabus. Um, um, and actually, the student learning outcomes at one point became really helpful for me, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And I'm definitely not just going top to bottom and keep going. I'm finding myself, listing out some major assignments with some details, and then coming down into this space, but then remembering, oh, and then I'll go back up and add something here, add something there. Really quickly, this was really helpful. I'm spending a lot of my time with this big picture stuff in the back of my head, but thinking about the specifics of my typical kind of active learning go-tos, right? So whole class discussions, broken up by small group discussions with about readings that have a designated student leader. That's really like the bedrock of my English 202 class meeting, right? That characterizes who we are once we get going. I'm also kind of breaking up that typical class session with some mini lectures about either concepts or skills or whatever it might be, and also workshops, right? Group presentations are really important, but at this point, I'm kind of letting that go a little bit. I want it there if I can think of how to bring it in. But campus resources are really important, either going to the space, so like the Writing Center or the library, or having guests representing those resources visiting our class. That's not something I'm willing to let go of. So I'm trying to think about how to get it in. Okay. Okay. So when I was starting to fill this out, this side was blank. There's only this, and this was pretty easy to fill out. This is stuff I've done. As I said, I'm just going back to my lessons plans. I'm going back to Canvas. It started off as sort of like this, kind of just little topics. So like there's a mini lecture, there's gonna be a small group discussion, there's an icebreaker. And then once I started kind of revisiting my notes, I started building in some more particulars, like an actual title of an assigned reading. This was helpful for me because if I was just looking at the broad strokes, I wasn't quite able to envision what I wanted to do with them in Canvas. So I could kind of see if I'm lecturing, if I'm having discussions, well, discussion boards in Canvas and Zoom will be helpful. I want to use Studio for my mini lectures, but it wasn't really until I started thinking about a particular assignment that I'm then thinking about, oh, okay, I think I know what's possible for designing this online. And so here I want to kind of go back to the big picture. As I said, when I went and really thought about the outcomes for English 202, I started to recognize a recursive pattern of active learning activities that I'm already kind of relying on, but I didn't really think about in these broad strokes until I went through this worksheet and this sort of reflection. I'm seeing reading as kind of the starting point, right? And reading really, the way I center it in my class is in discussions. So not necessarily throw down arguments, but argumentative discussions in which we infer, we debate, we analyze, we make claims about, we synthesize with other content that we're working with, right? And that's recursive, right? It's we read something, we talk about it, we read something else, we talk about it, and this really pushes us into that writing space where we formalize our ideas with logic, with clarity, right? Etc. Right? And so and we just cycle through that. So I started when I okay. So and let me pause real fast. When I first started listing this stuff out, it became really tempting to just list that out in a module. If I'm already starting class with this and then following it up with this and this and this, I can just list that out in a module and say students start here and end there. I think that possibly could work, but there's something about the sort of dynamic synergy of a class meeting that allows this to work in one way that I am fearful the asynchronous interaction won't match, right? So instead, I thought about that recursive pattern that I see in the slows for 202, and I sort of can conceive of a rhythm for every week. Instead of two things, like 2 days worth of content, do this by Tuesday, do this by Thursday. Instead, I'll structure a week around these four things. At the beginning of the week, you're going to find a mini lecture that kind of helps set some things up. And then there's going to be some reading that I want you to engage with mindfully. And then there's going to be a space for collaboration. I'm not super happy with the verb argue, so I probably won't call it that when I actually build this thing, but something like play or something like explore or even something just like discuss, right? So read this, discuss this, and then write this. Now, there's a lot of particulars that I could spend 20 minutes going into, and I just don't want to do that in this video. So so I won't. But I just want to point out again, just my process for thinking through. I'm still thinking I want to schedule one meeting a week for my 202 online classes. So I want to meet in Zoom. So I'm not sure, should that be early in the week? Should that be later in the week? I'll also have deadlines within the week itself. So it'll be read this over the course of the week, but maybe something is due earlier than maybe something else, right? But I think this real simple pattern is going to provide a predictability about the class, a rhythm, and then just a recursive interaction with content that is always building up towards writing and is always leading back towards deepening ideas, which is always leading back up towards writing, right? And so I think that there's a lot of potential in there. So the last thing I want to say just about my process is I'm noticing that as I'm thinking about how this week's going to go and what the online modality affords me, something that I would traditionally or typically do in a class that meets in a classroom, I'm starting to move that around, right? So for example, day 2 is when I review the syllabus. But since day 1 is already I'm doing all this in week 1, and the normal semester we had a holiday, so day 2 occurred week 2. I'm actually going to just make this, there's going to be a writing assignment about the syllabus. So we'll end week 1 with a writing assignment about the syllabus. I've never done that before, but the online class, I think, lends itself to that switch. Another thing I normally do day 2 is introduce students to a hypothesis. I'm thinking that, man, we're already in an online class. We're being introduced to these different skills. We're playing with different tools. I think it would be a mistake to offer them one more thing. So I'm going to move hypothesis to week 3. It limits what I can do on day 3, or what I normally do with day 3 to some extent, but I can still talk about mindful reading practices. I can still talk about this leadership role. I can still promote collaboration and even introduce them to annotation. But then the next week, when we don't have so much on our plate, we've got some room to learn a new tool. Here's where I can revisit annotation skills through a new tool like hypothesis. So I'm going to shut up because, like I said, I could go on forever. But I hope that illustrates just a process for working with this worksheet, and a way for thinking about the affordances of an online class, the tools, the interfaces, the organizational possibilities that will lend themselves to the outcomes, the skills, the assignments, all those things that you typically do in this course.